Nicholas was a man of simple means, a farmer who lived alone on a small plot of land surrounded by vast, towering cornfields. He enjoyed the solitude of his life, the peaceful rhythm of planting, tending, and harvesting crops. His farmhouse, a modest structure built by his father decades ago, stood quietly in the center of the property, with the corn growing up high and dense around it, forming walls of green that seemed to stretch forever. Nicholas had always found comfort in the isolation. There were no nosy neighbors, no distractions, just him, his dog Luke, and the endless fields. Life moved predictably, season by season, until the night when everything began to change. One late afternoon, as Nicholas walked through the rows of corn, checking for pests and weeds, he noticed something strange. A section of the corn had been flattened, as though someone had walked through and ripped the stalks out. The pattern it left was odd, forming a large circular shape. At first Nicholas shrugged it off, muttering to himself, "Probably some local boys messing around." He resolved to catch them in the act if they dared return. After all, if there was one thing Nicholas couldn't stand, it was trespassers on his land. That night, as he drifted off to sleep, the only sounds were the gentle rustling of corn in the breeze and the occasional chirp of crickets. Luke lay at the foot of his bed, as usual. Everything seemed normal until a low, guttural bark pierced the quiet. Nicholas jolted awake. Luke, normally calm and quiet, was barking toward the fields. The sound was so insistent, so unusual, that Nicholas knew something must be wrong. His heart pounded as he pulled himself out of bed and moved to the window. He could barely make out the field in the moonlight, but Luke was still barking, his attention focused on one particular area of the corn. Nicholas grabbed his flashlight and headed out the door. "Calm down, Luke. There's nothing out there," he grumbled, but something gnawed at him, a sense of unease that had been absent from his life until now. He illuminated the place where the dog was barking, but there was nothing, just the waving corn. Nicholas tried to reassure himself that it was all in his head, that perhaps Luke had simply heard an animal. With a final glance at the still shivering stalks, he turned back to the house. The next morning, while out checking his crops, Nicholas found another section of the corn, flattened in a strange pattern, this one even larger than the last. It made his skin crawl. "Again?" he muttered under his breath. The circles were becoming more frequent, and each time they appeared, they seemed to be larger and more intricate. His irritation grew, mingling with an unfamiliar feeling, dread. Days passed, and the strange occurrences continued. Every night Luke would wake him with that frantic bark, and every time Nicholas would check the fields, only to find nothing. He was starting to feel like he was being watched, though he couldn't see anyone. He was getting angrier with each passing day. "If I catch whoever's doing this, they'll regret stepping foot on my land," he promised himself. One night the barking returned, more insistent than ever. Luke stood at the door, growling in a way Nicholas had never heard before. This time Nicholas had had enough. Grabbing his flashlight in one hand and his rifle in the other, he stormed out into the night, his heart racing with fury. "Whoever you are, I'm going to catch you," he shouted into the darkness. The flashlight beam danced across the rows of corn, illuminating nothing but stalks as far as the eye could see. But then a sound, a rustling, fast and erratic, caught his attention. Someone or something was moving through the corn at incredible speed, just ahead of him. Nicholas swung the beam in that direction and caught a glimpse of something moving, something fast and unnatural. His breath caught in his throat as he saw the corn stalks bend and part. But whatever was out there was too quick to catch fully in the light. He turned again and saw it. This time only 8 meters away. A blur of motion, a flash of grayish skin. His stomach dropped. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. The rustling grew closer, faster, surrounding him from all sides. He could see the corn shifting in circles around him, tightening, coming closer and closer. He raised his rifle, his hands shaking, trying to track the movement. Then, as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. The field became unnervingly still. Nicholas stood frozen, breathing heavily, his eyes darting in every direction. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something. Just beyond the last row of corn, a gray, thin limb sticking out from the stalks. A leg, too long and unnaturally slender, with skin that looked almost leathery. And then a hand, long bony fingers curling around the corn, just barely visible in the moonlight. Nicholas's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, the beam of his flashlight trembling in his hand. At first he thought it must be a trick of the light, some shadow making the shape appear monstrous. But then the limb twitched and the thing, whatever it was, disappeared back into the corn. His blood ran cold. Nicholas turned and bolted, sprinting through the corn, desperate to reach the safety of his house. But he could hear it behind him, the creature moving impossibly fast, chasing him through the rows. His legs burned as he pushed through the stalks, the corn whipping against his face and arms. The thing was gaining on him, and he knew if it caught him, he wouldn't survive. Just as he reached the edge of the field, it lunged. Nicholas felt a searing pain as the creature's claws tore into his back, pulling him down into the dirt. He rolled over, kicking out wildly, catching a glimpse of its face in the dim light. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a white, gaunt face with small, completely black eyes and a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. The sight of it filled him with a terror so deep he could hardly breathe. The creature snarled and clawed at him, its long fingers raking across his skin, but Nicholas fought back with everything he had. He kicked it hard in the chest, sending it stumbling back for a moment, just enough time to grab his rifle. Without thinking, he fired a shot. The creature let out a screech, a sound so high-pitched and unnatural that it made Nicholas's ears ring. The thing disappeared back into the corn, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Nicholas lay there for a long moment, gasping for breath, his whole body trembling. He couldn't process what had just happened, couldn't understand what he had seen. But he knew one thing. He had to get out of there. Stumbling to his feet, he ran back to the house, his back burning with pain. He fumbled for the phone and called 911, his voice shaking as he reported that he had been attacked. When the police and ambulance arrived, he told them it had been a bobcat, knowing they wouldn't believe the truth. The paramedics patched him up, and the police looked skeptical, but they said little. The strange events didn't stop there. A few days later, Nicholas received a visit from local authorities. They informed him that the government was interested in buying his land, something about plans for development, though they didn't give many details. They offered him a significant sum of money, more than his small farm was worth. Nicholas was reluctant to leave the home he'd known for so many years, but the memory of that creature, of the terror he'd felt, made the decision easier. He took the money, found a new place, and tried to put the whole thing behind him. Months later, curiosity got the better of him. Nicholas decided to return to his old property, just to see what had become of it. As he approached, he saw something that made his stomach twist. A large fence had been erected, surrounding the entire area, and beyond it, military personnel were patrolling the perimeter. He watched from a distance, his mind racing with questions. What had they found out there? What was that creature? Had it been there all along, lurking in the corn, waiting? Nicholas turned away and drove back to his new home, a sense of unease settling deep in his chest. Whatever it was, whatever they were doing there now, he was sure of one thing: he was never going back.